Good morning and welcome to Sunday at the Marxist Library. Except for some of you, it's not morning because we're now virtual. We no longer meet physically at the Nebo Proctor Marxist Library in Oakland, though sometimes we do have hybrid meetings. But for the most part, our meetings are by Zoom and they're virtual. So it's good afternoon to Richard Wright in the independent Oblast of Texas, and good afternoon to Bahman Azad, our speaker out in New Jersey. And sometimes we have some folks from across the pond as well, so that would be good evening. And this program, Sunday morning at the Marxist Library, we've been doing this for about a decade and a half. And my name is Roger Harris, and I'm on the program committee. And we're very proud that we've established a forum for progressive thought and a culture of very much open, comradely discussion, where just about anything is allowed as long as it's progressive and we're respectful of each other. The opinions that are expressed here are not necessarily that of the sponsoring group, which is the Institute for the Critical Study of Society, the ICSS, and we welcome divergent views, especially if they're done in a respectful manner. The program today will be about a 40-minute, or maybe even shorter, formal presentation. We'll stop for a break, and then we'll have a robust Q&A. And in the Q&A, we ask people to limit their either questions or their statements to about 2 minutes and allow our guests to respond to them. And we'll continue that until about 12:30, 1 o'clock Pacific time. The Marxist Library has the motto that we borrow from Karl Marx, because our program committee, you don't have to be a Marxist to join us, but the program committee is staunchly Marxist, and we uphold our motto is that of the one that Karl Marx wrote in his 11th thesis on Feuerbach. Philosophers have only interpreted the world in various ways. The point, however, is to change it. And our speaker today is uniquely qualified to speak to that motto. The topic is Iran's role in the anti-imperialist struggle. And I'll just mention one thing about Iran. Iran is probably one of the most targeted countries by the imperialists. There's a reason for that, and we'll hear about that in a moment from our speaker, who's Bahman Azad. Bahman was born in Iran. He actually served in the Iranian military. And he is in, I believe you're probably in daily contact with the progressive movement in Iran, with the Tudor Party and various people around that, and or even sometimes critical of that tendency within Iran. But Bahman has a PhD in sociology and economics. He taught at Rutgers, and he is now the president of the U.S. Peace Council, which is one of the oldest and leading anti-war groups in the United States. And I have the pleasure of serving on the executive committee of that organization with Bahman. Bahman is the representative of the World Peace Council to the United Nations, and Bahman just returned from Vietnam from an international meeting of the World Peace Council, which spoke about the very volatile situations here in the world. And hopefully Bahman will be able to touch on that, and particularly on the various views of the communist movement on the current situation today. He's on the administrative council of UNAC, the anti-war coalition, and we will probably have I think we have in the chat perhaps some of the anti-war activities, the peace activities that UNAC will be sponsoring, and we invite you to join them. Excuse me, Bahman was also co-chair of the Venezuelan Embassy Protectors Defense Committee, and the coordinator of the coalition against U.S. foreign military bases and the global campaign against U.S. NATO military bases. And he's also co-coordinator of the Hands Off Syria coalition. So with that, I welcome Bahman and very much look forward to hearing what you have to say about Iran's role in the anti-imperialist struggle.
Thank you, Roger, and thank you, comrades, for inviting me. My comments probably will not add to anything more than what you already know. I'm sitting among quite a knowledgeable group of people about the world politics and what is going on today. So I will try to limit myself to the general framework as I see things and leave the details for more discussion as we proceed. What we are seeing today in Iran is nothing new, but at the same time is new, in the sense that since the revolution in 1979, US imperialism was bent on destroying that revolution and changing the course of its progress. In the first few years, the US did everything in terms of intervention, coup attempts, Iraq war, many other intrigues to crush what was going on in Iran. And they didn't succeed, of course. The longest one was the instigation of Saddam Hussein to start a war with Iran and occupy the territories. And the plan originally, as I understand it, was to occupy the southern provinces of Iran, southwestern province of Khuzestan in Iran, to capture the oil fields of Iran, which is, they're primarily based in Khuzestan, and then use the generals of the Shah who had escaped to come back and declare an independent state in Khuzestan. And had they succeeded, probably they would have ended the Iranian revolution there. But it didn't work. Of course, there were million and a half casualties on both sides during the 8 years. It really drained the revolutionary energy of the Iranian government, and in a sense changed the balance of forces inside the country. Of course, there are terror attempts, assassinations of the top leaders on the left side. As a result of the war and as a result of all those attempts, there was a new generation of capitalist and bourgeois merchant capital that was during the war under the embargo benefited a lot, greatly from import of the basic necessities and everything else as the Iranian infrastructure was being destroyed. So they gained support, they gained power, and gradually managed to have very important influence on the politics of Iran, internal politics of Iran. They first took over the Iranian parliament, the Majlis. They gained the majority there, changed policies and all that. But that course of reversal, in a sense, it was a break at the beginning, but the reversal began with the election of Rafsanjani. I'm sure you're aware of him and you know him, as president, and a new course which was mostly redirected towards the West, redirected the Iranian economy and the application of all IMF and World Bank economic policies, restructuring, privatization, opening the doors and all that. So with that process, kind of Iran, which had started with the slogan of neither East nor West, in a sense tended toward the West, at least economically. During that period, at the early times, probably its foreign policy was more or less kind of coexistence with the US. But gradually, with this rising new liberal bourgeoisie that was emerging in Iran, the economy of the country more or less transformed itself into a kind of a US Western-based, US Western-oriented economy, a new liberal economy, with the weakening of the government and a strengthening of the private sector, as we all know. So the policy of neither East nor West was gradually losing its neither West side and gravitating toward the West. This gave rise to a real big, huge, kind of parasitical bourgeoisie in Iran that really gained power and managed to control the state for a long time. This went on. This led to a kind of a dual policy or dual approach, both by the United States towards Iran and Iran towards the United States, because there were two wings in the leadership of Iranian government. One more radical, more pro-independence, and the other more pro-West on the Iranian side. The US, recognizing this, had a dual policy toward Iran as well. They never tried to do what they originally tried to do at the beginning of the revolution, to crush the whole thing. But the focus was on strengthening this emerging bourgeoisie, neoliberal bourgeoisie in Iran, with the hope that at some point they will manage to take the upper hand and get rid of the radicals and move Iran back to the orbit of international capital. This was going on for about 20, 30 more years, about, I would say 40 years by now. And this dual policy, both on the side of Iran and on the side of the United States, was going on until the beginning of the 21st century, rise of China. Things began to change a little bit. And what changed the whole picture was the entrance of Russian forces into Ukraine, and the emergence of a situation where all the contradictions of US imperialism came to the surface. And in my view, the entry of Russian forces with the special operations in Ukraine actually transformed the quantitative changes that were happening around the world over time for the past 30, 40 years, especially since the collapse of Soviet Union, into a qualitative shift. The passive resistance that existed since 1991 to US domination and unipolar world it had created, and its excesses around the world. With Russian move, it turned into a qualitative shift. It became an active resistance. And I think that changed the whole scenario as it was going on in the world. And now, with this new situation, countries of the world were forced, one way or another, to take sides. It was becoming increasingly impossible to actually sit between two chairs in this situation. And the US actually forced that situation as well, forcing the governments and the countries to decide which side they are. In this context, it was in this context that Iran found itself in a position that it could no longer sit between two chairs and maintain this neither East nor West policy, and had to take sides. And given the fact that the US had no tolerance of an Islamic state in Iran, regardless of what Iranians do, they decided to move toward the East. This is a very complicated process. We're not dealing with Cuba or Venezuela or countries like that. We're dealing with a country that whose economy is really based on Western economy system and Western capital. And the top leadership has never been unified in one direction or the other. It has been a tug of war between different factions within the leadership of Iran. Of course, they all, up to this level, up to the present situation, they cooperated with each other, they tolerated each other, and at the same time, they benefited from that tolerance. One thing I should mention is that because of the US animosity toward Iran from the very beginning and all those plots to overthrow the Iranian government and the revolution, Iranian government internally approached its domestic policy from a kind of a security point of view. It was a security conscious policy. And as a result of that, any move in opposition, in protest, in organizing, was considered as a threat by the Iranian government and possibly a kind of a plot by the United States and the West. And in that sense, the government cracked down on any effort to organize trade unions, civil rights organizations, all kinds of activities in that direction, even political parties, opposition parties, all of them were crushed because of the fear of threats to the security of the Iranian state. What happens is that this new liberal bourgeoisie really benefited from this approach throughout this time. With the Iranian government trying to maintain a domestic security with a fist, the neoliberal bourgeoisie took advantage of lack of organization on the part of workers, on the part of government employees, on the part of the political parties and all that, and really ripped the people off and accumulated huge amount of capital and led to a very wide class division in Iran, with lower levels of the society really suffering economically, no job security, no healthcare. Not, although constitutionally they are supposed to be provided, but all kinds of obstacles were put into it. Education became more or less privatized, not officially, but all those schools appeared in the private sector, trying the same way it's happening in the United States. So all those things happened under the nose of the Iranian government by the neoliberal bourgeoisie that was reaping profits out of that and causing huge tension within society and dissatisfaction. Workers were the most dissatisfied categories, government employees, teachers, retirees, all of those people were suffering. And Iran was gradually becoming a kind of a powder keg and ready to explode. Now the question is, so long as this situation existed, but for the US, there was a hope that they can turn Iran toward the West. They didn't really bank on it. They here and there, especially with regard to Iran's policy toward the Middle East, support for Syria, support for Hezbollah and all that, they confronted Iran. But domestically, they never confronted Iran in a serious way. But this time, with the Iranian government moving toward the East, siding with Russia, orienting toward China and dealing with China, and getting involved, and I get to all of these actions that the Iranian government has been doing recently. The US decided that US imperialism decided that they cannot tolerate the Iranian government anymore, especially the radical or left wing of the government, which by our standards is not left, but left within the spectrum of the forces that are in charge. So what happened in the last election, presidential election? The more radical wing that was moving toward dealing with Russia and China won the election, did everything to win the election, and kind of purged the liberal and neoliberal wing from the executive branch of the government. This is not a total control, but it is certain degree of control in terms of setting the policy and moving forward. And they did that. And what happened was that the same neoliberal bourgeoisie that was cooperating, tolerating each other at the top level, now because of this move has moved toward becoming an opposition, internal opposition force. And there is a serious issue here, and that is what is making Iranian situation dangerous right now, is that most of the economy of the country is in the hand of that neoliberal pro-West bourgeoisie in Iran, while the security forces, the Revolutionary Guards, the executive branch is in the hand of those radical forces that are leaning toward East. So a big battle is going on right now in Iran. Of course, the neoliberal pro-West bourgeoisie is really controlling the economy, creating all kinds of obstacles in terms of agreements that Iran is making with China, in terms of agreements that they're making with other countries in Eurasia and other places, just trying to sabotage every one of those efforts. That's why so many contracts right now agreements have been signed by Iran, but the implementation is almost, with regard to all of them, pending, because there's a lot of obstacles the Iranian government has to overcome internally to be able to implement those things. Now, the situation is dangerous because not only that the pro-West bourgeoisie has joined the opposition in this process, and is now, there's a fear that it's going to be acting as a fifth column of the West inside the country, which it didn't do up to this point. But 40 years of neoliberal economic policy has created enough dissatisfaction among the lower strata of the population that the government, the new grouping or faction that is leaning toward the East, cannot overcome the resistance of the pro-West bourgeoisie unless it has the support of those lower strata of society that are the majority, who are going to be benefiting from this reorientation of the foreign policy. But they are alienated right now. They are alienated. The pressure internally is very high. Iran has been ready to explode, and these explosions up to a lower level had come before. In 2009, in 2019, all uprisings in different, you remember probably there were 90 cities protesting about the prices of gas, hikes in the prices of gas and all that. So those things happened. If you remember, US was just observing that, didn't participate. But at this level, with this new situation, the US decided that they have to do it right now because of the role Iran has been playing, not only just joining Russia and China in that sense, but the role, critical role it is playing to facilitate this process of emergence of a multipolar world. If you have noticed, I'm sure you have, that anytime US is talking about the enemies, it's talking about Russia, China, Iran. Those three together all the time for the US right now. And there is a reason for it. And I want to go over some of the agreements and roles that Iran is playing, you know. Iran is actually becoming a kind of Russia's connection to the external world because of the sanctions. There's a lot of swaps happening between Iran and Russia in terms of Russian trades going through Iran because of the embargo. There are strategic agreements with China on top of the economic agreements, the 25-year strategic agreement, billion-dollar contracts with China. There are strategic agreements with Russia, not only economic terms, oil swap, and all other things, but also in military terms. And I heard the other day that even there's an expansion of the military strategic agreement between Iran and Russia. Iran is pretty much getting involved in Eurasia and all those cooperation that is going on with Russia. Iran is in Latin America, you know that it's with BRICS Plus. Iran is now almost becoming a member. Iran is kind of a alternate member right now, and of ALBA. Iran is, you know, its role played, the role it has played in helping Venezuela, breaking the sanctions of the United States, helping Cuba, with Nicaragua now, and all other relationship with Bolivia now, the relationships. So Iran is playing a key role also in bridging these extraterritorial agreements between the countries that are going on. With Africa, Iran is really becoming very active. As far as I know, the trade with Africa has risen in the last few years from $1.2 billion to $5 billion. And from the beginning of this year up to the present, 400 African economic delegations have been visiting Iran for making deals and contracts and agreements. So Iran is all over the place. Iran is part of North-South corridor between Russia, Iran, and India. Iran is part of the Belt and Road project of China. Iran is that central node that connects all of these elements together. So bringing down Iran is a key element in defeating the process of the multipolar world that is underway. And this has become a critical point. Iran has a strategic position in this process. And in a sense, the fate of Iran, which was, you know, US animosity toward Iran, was mostly focused against Iran because of its role in the Middle East. Now, the Iranian role has become international, global, and Iran is becoming a key element in the confrontation between China and Russia on one hand, and the United States and the West on the other. And in that sense, attacking Iran is a key to attacking Russia and China in this new process. So that is why, for the first time, the US started kind of hijacking the protests that were going on in Iran for a long time as a result of economic policies, internal economic policies. Now it's trying to hijack it and transform it into anti-government protest that is directed at overthrowing the Iranian government and not meeting the demands of the public and the population of Iran. So they are hiding under the same slogans of democracy and human rights, the US, trying to push this velvet revolution in Iran. If you look at the events around the world during the past few weeks, you will see that the Saudis and the British have been orchestrating the whole process, issuing command, facilitating the social media processes, creating alternative channels for the opposition, bringing all the information from Iran. If you look at the news pieces that are being published all over the place, it's all protests. If you look at it, it's all protests, nothing else about Iran. And even when they're talking about UN and Iranian delegation there, they put a picture of protests in there. And underneath it says, protests in such and such place in Iran, September so-and-so date. Still, in November, they're doing it. In December, they're doing the same thing. The protests are diminishing. They are scattered inside Iran. But we are concerned about what we consider as being Syrianization of the process. That is, looking at the border areas of Iran like Kurdistan, Baluchistan, and I have heard recently Azerbaijan, some forces inside the Azerbaijan are talking about the unification of Azerbaijan, including independence of Iran and Azerbaijan and joining the Azerbaijan proper. So these efforts are being pushed by Israel on the Iranian Kurdistan side. Baluchistan is also being, manipulated. Now Azerbaijan, and our fear is that is one possibility that can happen to impose the continuation of this conflict and tension on Iran. Another process option that we have been discussing, we are not predicting these things, but we look at the possibilities, is doing what they did to Venezuela with Guaido. US has frozen a lot of Iranian assets. US and Blinken has been meeting with the so-called new leaders of the Iranian protests abroad. They have been meeting in the State Department, meeting with all of them are calling for US doing something to bring down the Iranian government and change the regime. We are not ruling out the possibility of formation of similar efforts by the US, another Guaido-like person or entity, and there's quite enough opposition forces funded by the CIA abroad that could act in that capacity. So that is also one possibility. Now, the key element here, which I think is critical, is that Iran cannot fight this battle when it has serious problems internally, economically. The pro-East policy cannot be successful without a reorientation of Iranian internal economy and removal of its new liberal policies that has created so much tension and so much alienation inside the country. The Iranian government can win this battle only if it can regain the trust and support of the working people of the country. If it doesn't, it's going to be isolated and alone. In this protest, if you look at this whole picture, the mass of population did not join the protests. It was mostly directed by youth through social media. Not that they didn't have legitimate demands, but its transformation into violent action, killing the security forces or putting fire to this building or that building, to us is a dangerous path that could create a cycle of violence and suppression, violence and suppression, violence and suppression. And this is exactly what US is hoping for. Up to a point where the public in Iran, to remove all those crackdowns and put an end to it, calls for international help. And that would be a different scenario from that point on with the US. This is our fear. So our hope is that the wing that is moving Iran toward the east understands this threat, domestic threat, which to me and to us here on the left, certain groupings in the left, is the hope that the wise, more aware and wise elements in this leadership understand the critical situation, that the internal threat is much more serious right now than the external threat. And they respond to that situation not by crackdowns, by reorienting the economy and meeting the demands of the majority of the population in terms of freedoms and the social justice, questions of economic justice. If they do that, they will win this battle. If not, then the fate of the Iranian situation will be very, very gloomy. That's our feeling. One last thing I wanted to say is, unfortunately, the left in Iran has swallowed the Kool-Aid whole in this. All of them have joined the external, all those protests that are organized by Voice of America, BBC, and Saudi Arabian networks, all over the place, in Europe, in Berlin, in London, in other places, and are calling for international community to intervene in the internal affairs of Iran. This is very unfortunate. Probably there are a few forces in Iran, including some of us, who are opposed to that idea. And we have always talked about the anti-imperialist battle being having priority over other considerations, and Iranian independence should not be sacrificed in the name of human rights and democracy. And if it happens, none of it will be left. That's our position. I stop here. Sorry if it was too long, but
it was very good and very packed with information. So thank you so much. We'll take a break right now from the formal presentation and ask Jean Rule to maybe tell us a bit about what's coming up in the Marxist Library programs next week and the following. Jean?
Okay, well, thanks so much, Bahman. Really, I wish I could say everything is crystal clear now, but I'm sure we all have a lot of continuing questions, and so we're looking forward to that. But just want to say that next week we're going to continue our discussions, and actually next week we have our very own Roger Harris speaking on the volatility of U.S. hegemony in Latin America. And do you want to say anything more on that right now, Roger?
Yes, I would underscore the word volatility because in this last week, we had two lawfare coups in Latin America. The government of Peru was overthrown, and the vice president of Argentina, who's the leading left candidate for the next election, was just legally barred from running for office and given a 6-year, I believe, prison sentence. So the situation is very volatile, but the hegemony is now on a new footing that's very fragile. So we'll be exploring some of the same themes of this inflection point in world geopolitics that Bahman so well brought up today.
Okay, so and then after that, we're going to take a break for the seasonal holidays on December 25th and January 1st. And then we're going to get back with it on January 8th with our comrade Yusuf speaking on Stalin's important work on Marxism and the problems of linguistics. January 15th, we have John Walsh speaking on China's dynamic zero COVID policy, facts from the East and fictions from the West. And we continue on that. And so the best place to get information, it's all on our website. And if you, most of you probably already get our weekly reminders, but if you don't, go to ICSSmarx.org and you'll find the first thing you'll get is a chance to sign up for our weekly reminders, which also include the login information for this. So I think that's about it. Back to you, Roger.
Well, thank you. So now we'll have a question and answer period. We ask people to raise their hands and I will call on them roughly in the order that I see them. And if you could make your question or your comment about 2 minutes, and we'll give our speaker, Bahman Azad, a chance to respond to those things, and we'll see how that goes. So I see Alan's hands up. So Alan Miller, please.
Thank you, Bahman. That was actually, despite your humble introduction, I feel like I really learned a lot from your presentation. Very, very informative. What I would like you to comment on is the significance of Iran in regional politics related to Palestine, Lebanon, etc. And what would be the implications of a serious reversal in terms of the United States succeeding in isolating or destroying Iran's influence on the struggles in the Middle East and those countries in particular?
Roger, do you want me to answer questions one by one, or you want to? Okay, I go ahead. I guess Roger is frozen.
We usually do them one by one.
Okay. I'm sure you all are aware of the role of Iran in defeating U.S. plan for Syria. Iran was a key element in frustrating U.S. efforts to bring down Bashar al-Assad government. Of course, after the entry of the Russia into the picture in Syria, there was a coalition or a front of resistance formed between Russia, Syria, Iran, and Lebanon in terms of confronting US plans for domination in the region. And it is still going on. And one thing I want to add to that element is that up to that point, it was a question of the region and confrontation with the US at the regional level. But at this level, at this moment, this has gone beyond that. As I said in my talk briefly, now the fate of Iran is tied directly to the fate of the battle that is going on internationally between China and Russia on the one hand and Western powers on the other, Western imperialism. And in that sense, Iran is not just alone and as a separate actor in the Middle East anymore, because these are elements are tied to each other right now. Just imagine if NATO succeeds, for example, in Ukraine to push Russia back and win the battle, the whole thing will collapse in the Middle East as well. So in a sense, we are dealing with an international situation now that Iran is the central part of, and not just as something that is happening at the regional level. So the battle is much broader than that right now. Iran was playing a key role in the Middle East with regard to Lebanon and Syria. And it has playing critical role also in Afghanistan and Iraq, and as we all know. So Iran is one of the pillars of resistance in the Middle East, but the issue has expanded beyond that right now, and we are dealing with one comprehensive overarching battle at the international level, at the global level. And now this battle in the Middle East has become part and parcel of that global battle right now. And I think the situation is such that Iran cannot be now targeted alone. There are allies with Iran right now, and Iran is a part of a front that the US cannot just bring it down. I don't see the chances of US succeeding in bringing down Iran very high, but it depends on the developments and how Iranian government deals with the situation. But Iran now has very close allies with those military strategic pacts and agreements with Russia. The picture has changed right now, it seems to me. And it's not easy for the US to really attack Iran all by itself.
Thank you. Next up is Richard, followed by Janet, and then Yusuf. So Richard, if you would unmute yourself and ask your question, please.
Yeah, thank you very much for a good presentation. Especially in light of that you highlighted not so much the theological dynamics that are going on in Iran, but the class politics, something that we don't hear a lot about over here. I mean, I turned on to Fareed Zakaria this morning, and he was interviewing, I can't remember her name, but the executive director for human rights, internet, whatever it is, and she was just giving this whole platitude of the need for the U.S. to go in and come in and help Iran become a democratic state. And we all know what that means. And that brings me back to something I think you didn't really get into, and I think it really is important. And that is that Iran is really the stage, set the stage in post-World War II geopolitics in terms of intelligence operations between the United States and the CIA and the MI6. It was the first successful, if you can call it that, counter-revolution for a democratic government, and they found out how cheap it was to do it, and they've continued on into now we've got not only do we have the CIA and the State Department, but we've also got the National Endowment for Democracy, and I was wondering if you could maybe speak a little bit to that, because that's not very well known here in this country, and yet they're playing such an important role, or at least that's what you seem to hear about in the dynamics of not only Iran but also Russia and China. So that's my question, I guess. Thank you.
Can you formulate your question for me, because I didn't know exactly what you're saying.
Can you speak to the role of U.S. intelligence operations, not only in Iran, but if you can, also in Russia and China, but particularly in Iran, because as I said, it was the first instance of a successful overthrow of a government, and in the process, it led to the decimation of a lot of the leftists in Iran. After when the Shah was installed, and that led to the Khomeini and the theological Iran. So, anyways, could you go into the intelligence operations that you, or could you maybe speak towards that? Thank you.
To be honest, I'm not an expert on that part of it, but as you know, the CIA, the U.S. Embassy in Tehran during the Shah's time, was the headquarters of the control of the whole Middle East. It was being managed from U.S. Embassy in Tehran. And when the students took over the embassy, they recovered all of the shredded documents, if you remember, and they put out a kind of I think it was a 45-volume series, which, by the way, I have a copy of, and showing all the information, giving all the information about operations of the U.S. intelligence services, CIA and others, MI6, in the whole region, operated from Tehran inside the U.S. Embassy. Well, the revolution did not I don't think it could eliminate or uproot the whole thing. There has always been the presence. And we have seen it in the sabotages that are happening inside Iran in various ways, especially by Israeli Mossad. You know, the assassinations of the Iranian nuclear scientists. You know, the cyber attacks on the Iranian nuclear facilities. All of those things are happening by people who are still inside Iran, are operating. And I'm sure, given the presence of this strong pro-West bourgeois class in Iran, probably they are being protected in some ways too. So I wouldn't be surprised if we find out that these operations are still going on in Iran. And one thing I don't want to accuse anybody of anything, but I just wanted to point to one fact that surprised me. This death of Mahsa Amini in Iran at the hand of the Iran's moral police was very strange to me. First of all, it's a girl from Kurdistan. And secondly, that death happens, I think it's the day after or a couple of days after Iran joined Shanghai Agreement. And the protests begin the day that Raisi is speaking at the United Nations General Assembly. To me, it's curious. This is the last thing Iranian government wanted to have with the battle that it had with the West, to create such a situation. They showed that, she collapsed herself and there was nothing, but the accusations remained and became the whole basis of all those protests. Now my question is, was that also part of a plan to create that situation for it? Was Israeli Mossad involved? Who knows, right? But it's curious for me. That could be one, because it fits within the scheme of things as they are happening. And they knew that Iranian society was very tense and ready to explode. And they created this situation. I'm not saying that it is justified, that the actions are fake. No. Iran is responsible. It's the Iranian internal policy that is responsible for these things happen. No question about it. But the timing of this thing and the way it proceeded, for me, is curious. It could easily be an intelligence operation. I wouldn't be surprised if sometime in the future the evidence comes up. And the reason for it is another strange thing that has to do with the issue of the Islam and the question of Islamic forces in Iran. Because if you look at the history of the ruling class in Iran, it has its own divisions. Of course, the Islamic orientation of the government existed from the very beginning. It was part and parcel of the whole thing. But the pro-West neoliberal bourgeoisie in Iran has always been against all these enforcement of Islamic measures. But one bourgeois class that sided with the part of the leadership of Iran that is now moving toward the East was the Iranian merchant class with a space in the traditional society. Right? So it is the radical wing plus the merchant class that took over in this last election and participated in the reorientation. that merchant class is pretty much fanatic in its religious orientation. They got the upper hand, and they tried, immediately after the elections, they tried to enforce in a much more restricted way the question of Islamic hijab and chador and all those things on the women in Iran, immediately after the takeover, after the elections. And they unleashed this moral police again on society while it was gradually being diminished. It was a return to that. And it had to do with this wing of the ruling class that joined the pro-East policy against the Western-oriented bourgeoisie. Now, the question becomes, the radical wing, if they want to pursue this successfully toward the East, this policy, they have to reduce the tension inside the country. One of that is reducing the pressure on women. Now, with the ally in this process, the most fanatic religious force or wing of the bourgeoisie in Iran, how far can they go in reducing these pressures on women and removing the restrictions on women without having a fight among themselves over this? And the whole coalition of forces that is moving towards the East could collapse because of that. I'm not sure how much the radical wing can pressure the Islamic merchant capital wing to give up those principles for the sake of the future struggle. This is another possibility that another kind of tension within the group that is doing or for pursuing this pro-East policy, that it is not unified in itself because culturally that merchant wing is opposed to relaxing restrictions on women. Now, if they push it too far to remove the pressure from inside, internal pressure, then they risk the split in their own coalition. If they don't do it, they risk additional tensions within society. So it's a very kind of a dilemma at this stage, it seems to me, that the government is facing in its policy right now.
Okay, next is Janet, followed by Yusuf. And I would just remind everybody that if you have any questions, now is a great opportunity to bring them up. Go to the reactions button at the bottom of your screen and raise your hand. So Janet, if you would please proceed.
Okay, so thank you. Very informative for me. And kind of picking up on what you were just talking about and also piggybacking a little bit on what Richard was asking. To me, these current protests, I think of another color revolution in the makes, and I also can't help but think about the Maidan coup, which started out as nonviolent protests, but then the Azad influence just came in and violently it was a coup, and throughout Yanukovych, who was being pulled between the East and the West, and chose the East. And so he was thrown out, but of course it was the US orchestrating this whole thing. So I'm wondering about whether, are there any like right-wing paramilitary organizations inside Iran? That the CIA might be funding, that they might, what you said about another Guaido, kind of parallel to that, but I'm thinking more about more like another a Maidan coup in the making. With that, anyway, I'll stop there.
Yeah, thank you, Jen. First, I want to distinguish one thing here. I would not characterize what is going on right now in Iran, at least in terms of internal protest, as a color revolution. I distinguish between the legitimate demands of the people and women and the working people and the teachers and the retirees and all those things. I distinguish between that and the efforts from outside to hijack these legitimate demands and turn it into a velvet revolution. So I would not dismiss the process of protest per se. I object to the US attempt to turn it into that and transform the demands from, we want minimum wages increase, we want job security, we want to remove all of the restriction on women and all those things that are all legitimate demands. And even the youth that have, under Islamic restrictions, there's not much they can do, not much activity left for them, So those demands are legitimate. And they have been going on. I mean, actually, the retirees won a huge concession from the government through organizing peaceful protests and peaceful mobilization. The same with the teachers. They gained a lot with that. But turning it into violent protest is the work of the West. And that is exactly, in Syria, it happened the same way. I mean, it was a protest, peaceful. And the Syrian government responded by reforming the constitution immediately, if you remember. But they transformed into an armed struggle. And if you remember, it started from the borders with Jordan, border with Turkey. That's how it became this violent confrontation and military confrontation. In Iran, as far as I'm concerned, as far as I'm aware of, there is no kind of underground military operation against the government, as far as I know. Iran is militarily and security-wise in full control at this stage. It cannot, under these present circumstances, turn into a coup like Ukraine. It cannot. But it can turn into something like Libya. Right? Turning it into chaos, complete chaos. Partitioning Iran. Creating centers, separate centers of armed struggle. And that way draining the Iranian government and bring it down. It would probably be more of a war of attrition against Iran rather than a coup like that, as far as I can see it.
Okay, next is Yusuf, followed by Raj. And again, if you have questions, please use the reaction button to raise your hand. So Yusuf.
Yeah, well, let me rethink my question in light of Bahman's last remarks.
Okay. We'll switch you with Raj then. Okay, Raj, are you okay with going
yes,
now?
I'm fine. Yeah,
Thank you.
my comment here is that this government that came to power as a result of the 1979 revolution has Islamic constitution, and the head of the state is a clergy. I mean, the Ayatollah is the head. So it sets up this contradiction with the left. I mean, they did a thorough job of destroying the left. And the Marxists were all driven out, killed. That's what they have done. Okay. Now, the women want their rights, and as Marxists, as leftists, we support that. Now you're saying is that the danger comes from this machination between new liberal capital that arose from traders and that of Americans inciting a group of people inside. And I watched the interview of the foreign minister yesterday on RT, and he was saying hundreds of police officers have lost their lives.
Yes.
And so here is my question to you. Why cannot they, government, ease the restriction on women? In other words, where is this sacred thing come from that you have to have hijab? Where did that come from? I don't think this is in Quran. So where does it come from? Why can't they do it? Because they're a strange mixture of modern and ancient. Why this contradiction cannot be resolved by this regime? It seems like its very birth makes it impossible. So we as leftists are left here always to kind of say, well, oppose US imperialism. Of course, we do oppose US imperialism, but here's the problem. They're also holding back the section which women who all over the world want less restriction. So that's my question to you.
Great question. Several levels we have to deal with. One, from the very beginning, there was this fanatic, fundamentalist Islamic current in the revolution that wanted to establish Islamic State. Islamic State meaning that there is no need for legislation, there is no need for constitution. Quran is the principle, is the law, and you have to follow that. They push for it. Khomeini himself opposed that. And he called for an Islamic republic. Those forces were strong. Those forces were strong. As you said, the left, the nationalist forces and all that were crushed during the Shah. All was left was the mosques and the traditional Islam. Those forces were very strong at the beginning, and they had a lot of influence. And they turned the ideology of the state, the ideology of Islam, but could not succeed to turn it into an Islamic state because Khomeini and his followers were opposed to that. They said that it is not appropriate to do that because they recognized the diversity of forces that were involved in the revolutionary process. Khomeini in Paris went as far as saying that the communists are going to be free in that country so long as they don't threaten the state. Khomeini called for an Islamic republic, a republic whose ideology is Islamic, but its internal process is based on democratic process. So in a sense, they did not create an Islamic state. They created an Islamic republic with dual character. You had the secular, I mean in terms of processes, of election, of president, parliament, everything else as a republic. And then you had this Islamic supervision on top of it, headed by the supreme leader. Now, if you look at the Iranian constitution, it's more progressive than many other constitutions, even the progressive ones that you recognize, with one caveat. Every time the rights are given are conditioned upon non-violation of Islamic principles. Now, This created a dual situation that has been the cause of tension from the beginning to the present in Iran. The supreme leader, under Khomeini, he had really the final say. He was the leader of the revolution, like Fidel was, like Lenin was, like Mao was. His respect was coming from leadership of the revolution. That's why he was all powerful then. But the supreme leader after that is not the same as Khomeini anymore. You're dealing with the growth of certain bourgeois classes in the country. You see the growth of the Revolutionary Guards as a very independent, powerful element in the picture. So supreme leader has to govern now with the consent of all other elements that are involved. It's not a monolithic dictatorial position that he has right now. Now, those traditional forces, Islamic forces that existed in the Islamic Republic Revolution, still exist and exert influence. And it's not easy to confront them. Khomeini had to compromise with them. Now the supreme leader has to compromise. Supreme leader is the one who is in charge of the redirection of Iranian policy toward the East. He is the one. But he's dealing with traditional forces inside his coalition that he cannot alienate too much, especially given the fact that he is now facing the opposition of neoliberal pro-West, which was an ally before, which is now in the opposition right now and helping bring down the Iranian government. So he cannot go too far against these traditional forces. And this dualism has always existed and will remain until the final decision is made on the nature of the Iranian government by the people. But there's no way that you can say the supreme leader has been doing everything on his own. No, Iranian government is being run by a clique of various forces, by a coalition of various forces. And it's from the beginning until today. So it's not easy to get rid of that element right now in Iran, given the fact that the Shah left the Iranian society as a traditional society with certain Western islands here and there in big cities. That mass majority has taken over by the revolution. And not only that, the new situation has not diminished that traditional role, but also their ideology has become the official ideology of the state and even further reinforced. So we are dealing with a real concrete situation. That's not a subject of anybody's decision to remove, but it takes a whole societal process, political process to overcome. And it's not easy given the fact that, as you mentioned correctly, the left has been decimated. So who is going to eliminate that? That's the question.
Okay, next is Jean. If you would unmute and ask your question, please.
But I can go ahead. Anyway, well, thank you so much. And again, I'm a member of Veterans for Peace, which is a educational and humanitarian organization dedicated to the abolishment of war. And as a Marxist, I understand that to abolish war, well, we need to abolish capitalism and have socialism, although that's not part of our mission there. But a central part of our mission is to restrain our government from intervening in the internal affairs of other countries. And I'm kind of an American exceptionalist in this regard, in that I kind of see our government as behind most of the unrest in one way or another around the world. So if we didn't start the unrest, we immediately intervene and turn it to our own purposes. So that's been kind of the American way of business in terms of the way we maintain our hegemony. But then you mentioned the Belt and Road Initiative, and that it is built along fundamentally different principles by the Chinese than the American way of doing international relations. And I just would like you to comment. You did mention it, and I'd like to hear more about your thoughts on the role of China and the Belt and Road Initiative on what's going on in Iran and the Middle East. So thank you again.
Sure. Belt and Road project that China has initiated is really based on the principles of a multipolar world with respect for the independence of the countries involved. They want to create an alternative economic order that bypasses the economic order dominated by the US imperialism and the Western imperialism. This participation on an equal basis by all the states involved in the process creates an alternative that is a big challenge to US domination. And this involves not only trade, but also an alternative financial situation, financial system that is independent of the US controlled Western financial system. If that works out, and US is putting every possible obstacle in this, because it's a chain of connection of the states. And if US can sabotage one link in the middle of it, this whole thing stops working. So they are trying to overcome this. And if you look at the countries involved in that project, for example, Azerbaijan is causing trouble right now, right? With the help of the United States to block that process, because the connection goes from China all the way to Europe. And if you can break links in the middle of this chain, you can stop it. And US is doing everything to stop that process by doing this. And Iran is a key element in that chain, because Iran is also at the crossroad of the north-south corridor between Russia and China. So bringing Iran down in this process could sabotage the whole Belt and Road project as well. So it's a battle. It's an international battle, no longer any regional battle going on. Everything is linked to each other right now. And it seems to me it's a very important project that really we have to work hard to make it happen, because it determines the fate of the future of humanity, I think.
Thank you.
Okay, next is Sharon, followed by Yusuf. So Sharon, if you would unmute and ask your question, please.
Thank you. I have two questions. The first is can you comment on the assassination of General Soleimani 2 years ago, I think it was? What class force did he represent? Was it just an opportunistic thing that happened, that he was in Iraq and they could get to him, or was more part of a overall plan? And then my that's a segue into my second question, which is, what you said about how Iran could turn into a Libya is just really bone-chilling, because the United States assassinated Muammar Gaddafi and caused that country to descend into chaos. And we don't want to see that happen in Iran, that kind of thing happen. And so we here should take advantage of the fact that you are the head of the U.S. Peace Council, Bahman, and ask what more can we be doing, or how can we be organizing anti-imperialist forces here in a better way? Because the task is daunting. The American people are so propagandized and just so misinformed. I also watch too much bourgeois television, mainly just to see what they're being fed, and it's all horrible garbage. So what can we do to bolster the anti-imperialist efforts in this country?
Oh, thank you for your question. First of all, regarding Soleimani, he was the key figure in creating a united front in the Middle East against US plans to bring down Syria, to crush Hezbollah. Soleimani was shuttling between Moscow, Damascus, and Lebanon, and all other forces in the region to bring together a unified coalition of forces to resist the US interventions against Israel also. So he was the key element on behalf of Iranian government to create this resistance front in the region. And he was successful. He was successful in defeating the Islamic State in certain areas. He was the key element in that. So US knew about his role. And that's why he was targeted. It wasn't an opportunistic thing. He was member of all this radical wing of the Islamic Republic that with the Revolutionary Guard, he was the head of the Quds brigade of the Islamic Republic in Syria. And that was the mission of the Quds brigade in Syria, to help protect the Syrian government and also bring together all the forces resisting the United States into a united front. And that is exactly what he did. And that's why his killing became very crucial for the United States. And that's why they assassinated him. As to what we can do with regard to peace forces in the United States, unfortunately, the peace movement in the United States is in shambles, I'm sorry to say. For a long time, the US Peace Council has been trying to bring together the anti-imperialist side of the peace movement together in a united front. To try to come up with a common strategy. You see, we have anti-imperialist forces within the United States, but unfortunately, each one of them has its own agenda. Priorities, separate priorities. Focusing on Ukraine, somebody focusing on the Middle East, somebody focusing on Latin America, all of us, right? But we do not have a coherent anti-imperialist force with a common strategy of how to approach this whole US government and foreign policy in a united way. And this, in our view, in the US Peace Council, is a critical element. We need a unified anti-imperialist front in the United States, not a whole bunch of anti-imperialist forces doing their own thing. Because in some ways, we undo each other sometimes. By dividing our forces, splitting our forces into two simultaneous things in different directions. You know, these are the things that we have to think about. We have to think strategically. The time for being just reactive to US government actions is over. We cannot stop that. We cannot wait until another war starts and bring people together. Or another sabotage starts and we bring the forces together. We have to be preemptive. To be preemptive, we have to have a strategic plan for what we do, have a common analysis of the situation, decide on our priorities, all of us join forces and carry out those priorities. If we don't do that, we're going to be forever protesting US imperialism in the United States. And that's our feeling. There have been some successful, especially within the context of UNAC, but this is still too limited. still too limited, although it's a successful process. We have a lot more forces to bring into the picture and bring into unified. We have been trying to put together meeting of the peace forces. Ukraine actually dismantled that because immediately the issue of Ukraine became a cause of split in that group. And so we are trying to resume that, but at least to put our heads together and see how we can work together in certain areas and all that. So to me, even not only in the United States, but in my understanding, we need an international anti-imperialist league. We do need that badly. You know, it is the governments of the world that are resisting internationally together. But the mass movements around the world are not working in a unified way, right? Each country on its own. We don't have a unified anti-imperialist front at the global level. We should bring that together also. But to do that, we have to start with ourselves in the United States and move forward from there. That's our view.
Okay, thank you. Next is Yusuf, followed by Rich J. So Yusuf, if you would unmute and ask your question.
Yeah, okay, thank you. It was a very interesting analysis, and your last remarks on the peace movement in the United States is right on point. You alleviated some of my concerns in some of your subsequent remarks, but let me say that there is seems to be this prevalent view in the progressive and socialist forces in the Middle East that we support wholeheartedly the not just women's rights, but the general secular demands of the protest, and that we are concerned that the United States will intervene, but we can't. We use this to its advantage, but we can. This is the prevalent view. I don't want to name names because I'm not their official spokesman. But we cannot make that the sole consideration, and of that imperialism will try to take advantage of trouble anywhere, and that cannot be the sole consideration. In regards to Syria, we have both. We have the Damascus government is secular. The communists are in coalition, so there is no problem of socialist or true socialist forces. For unfortunate reasons, this is not true for all, but generally supporting the Damascus government is not very so problematic. Of course, we prefer that the communists will be in charge, but well, anyway, short of that, their support for the Damascus government. I think there is somewhat of a difference between the situation in Iran, and it's not just, and that secularism is important for the working class. And it's a very important cornerstone demand. So I would like some comments on this. Thank you. But still, thank you for a very informative talk.
Thank you, Yusuf. Let me clarify a couple of things. First of all, the question of religion in general, I want to deal with that because they put Islamic orientation as if it's just reactionary orientation. Being Islamic does not mean reactionary. We have had many progressive Islamic movements in the history of Iran. Ideology of Islam is an ideology. It's a worldview, like every other worldview. If you look at it, worldviews are class-based. When we say Islam, the working class is Muslim, the bourgeoisie is Muslim, the middle class is Muslim. Do they have the same interpretation of their religion? For the working people, in the revolution, Islam was a banner for freedom. And it was. Only Islamic ideology at that level could bring in the revolution. You had no other option because there was nothing left. People had to gather around that. It was a unifying force. But does it mean it was negative, revolutionary, counter-revolutionary? No. Because the principles that Khomeini brought into the picture at the beginning of the revolution, the title of the land is the calluses on the hands of the farmers, peasants. Working class is the backbone of our revolution. These are the slogans. It was the class forces that changed that interpretation without changing the Islamic ideology. When we say Christianity, is liberation theology the same as Catholic hope? Is it the same? Or is it different interpretation according to the class orientation? So we should not identify whatever is Islamic with something always negative. Look at the condition of women in Iran. Culturally, yes, they are restricted. Politically, they are not. Economically, they are not in many ways. More women attend Iran's universities than men. Higher doctors than any other country in the Middle East are female. Engineers, everything else. Can we say Islam is doing that or not? So we cannot just categorize things under one banner and just get rid of everything. Yes, culturally, yes, restrictive culturally. Chador was a symbol of Iranian revolution then, the veil. Same for Algerian revolution. That in the hand of reactionary forces becomes a reactionary element. In the hand of progressive forces becomes a progressive element. Let me make a distinction here also. If you look at, I'm coming from a sociological point of view because that's my training. Go to any society. The lower you go on the social scale to lower classes, the more religious people become. The higher up you go, the more secular things are. Now, I want to make a distinction between being secular, and as a communist, I am a secular person, and my ideology is secular. But I make a distinction between that and secularism. That means declaring war on religion. I am opposed to that because that immediately puts us in head-on confrontation with the working classes in Iran. Whose social base will be for secularism in Iran? bourgeoisie, Western-oriented people. So if you raise the banner of secularism, in my view, you're working for US imperialism. In Iran, I mean, right now. The same way as I am a communist, but as a Leninist, I support reforms toward changing the system. But I'm not a reformist. That's different. So this is a battle that's going on within the left inside the Iranian movement. There are people who call for secular state. Well, in Syria, it worked because the balance of forces allowed that. In Iran, it doesn't. You call for secularism in Iran, you immediately falling into the hand of the West. So you have to put this in the context of historical circumstances to see if this is a suitable thing for you. As Marx himself said, it was industrial society and the advanced capitalism that got rid of all of those traditional chains of the working people, right? You cannot by force remove that. The historical process is required to do that. So the battle in Iran is not ideological battle against Islam. It's a class battle against neoliberalism. And we have to understand that. That's the only way we can succeed. That's all we have.
Okay, next is Rich J, followed by Raj, or actually is Isfara, followed by Isfara. She's a new participant. So Rich J, if you would go ahead and ask your question, please.
Yeah, thank you. First of all, I feel like I'm so far away from. I thank you very much. I just feel like I'm learning so much from what you said that I feel so far away from where I was. I guess 30, 40 years ago when I made that reference to Maghba Shah. But I guess my question is, after our program today is over, we'll have a recording. That's good. But things will keep changing month to month and year to year. And I hope we can take your advice, your point of view, your interpretation seriously. But I'm wondering if there's your best. You have a suggestion of a. It might be the Peace Council that has where we have access to follow up. To stay up to speed on what's. As Sharon referenced herself, I think it's true. Many people. Watching too much bourgeois television or whatever to kind of keep up with what's going on and what the government and what the media and everybody are feeding the people that watch that, because that's all they got. So my question is, what is the alternative? Where can we stay? Do you have a particular website and or whatever YouTube suggestion where we can keep up with at least what's happening in Iran, and if not the whole area, the relationship between Iran, Russia, and China, that kind of thing, and those danger points that you've talked about where we could be vulnerable, and a way of kind of, and also let me just say thank you. How can a place where we can sort of build this towards a united front of the anti-imperialists in their various work they do, so we can be more unified and strategic and using our forces effectively. I think my question's clear, I hope, but thank you.
Yes, thank you. Of course, US Peace Council has its own website and has its own Facebook page. I don't know if you're aware of it. But the key element here is bringing the forces together, and it's not just the task of US Peace Council. We are not that huge of an organization to be able to manage it unilaterally to facilitate everything. So we need to come to an understanding, at least for all forces, that there is a need for this thing.
Agreed.
And then collectively try to start a process for that. We have been calling for that, but other than issuing statements and inviting organizations to a meeting to discuss, and actually we had 2-3 meetings before. Some people from here may have been participating in it, of all peace organizations, to see if we can come up with a general strategy of fighting imperialism. But the problem was that it was a broader one, that not necessarily everybody was on the same page with regard to issues. So as soon as the issue of Ukraine came up, the whole thing was shattered. We are trying to resume that to see if we can come up with some agreement, at least on the issues that we agree on, to act collectively. So that's our process. That's what we are trying to do. And I'm hoping, and we are hoping that we can have the support of all of you in this process. And then I will keep you informed about the developments as much as I can.
Okay, next, I'm going to call on Roger, who was removed as moderator in a coup a while back, but the NED was not involved. So Roger, please proceed.
Yes, thank you, Alan. And thank you for taking over. We lost our internet connectivity here, so I'm now on my cell phone. But Bahman, thank you for a terrific program. One of the things that you touched upon, which I'd like you to elaborate on, if you could, was the role of Saudi Arabia. That Saudi Arabia, both regionally, both as an adversary and proxy of the United States against Iran, but also in recent months, really, the Saudi role appears to be evolving. It's gone along with the OPEC line of not increasing petroleum productivity, is involved in the BRICS, it's involved in the Belt and Road Initiative, all of which are touching on Iran, but in different ways than it traditionally had. So can you explain why the state, which was at one point simply a proxy state of the United States, is showing different orientations now?
Well, Roger, you know better than me that the balance of forces in the world is changing. And the grip, US grip on some of these states is loosening. And given and I would say this is not going to be limited to Saudi Arabia. There are other countries that are gradually shifting, and the more the wave will currently swell in terms of the reorientation as China is expanding its economic ties. And I think this last trip by Xi to Middle East, to Saudi Arabia, was very critical in terms of creating this new coalition or new orientation toward a new multipolar world. And, you know, these people like Saudi Arabia or states like that are not running on the basis of principles here. They're looking at their pockets and their interest and wherever they get more benefit and profit, they will move in that direction. The thing is that that is a sign of the weakening of US grip on these states. So the question of you give us oil and we protect you, that was the deal since the beginning of Saudi Arabia, has been weakening because US does not need Saudi oil anymore that much to begin with, right? So probably US is not that much interested in protecting them either. So things are changing. And for that reason, we should expect even more of instances like that.
What should we see though in terms of the relationship between Iran and the Saudis? Because the Saudis have been the major imperialist battering ram regionally against Iran.
Oh, there are lots of meetings go back and forth between Saudis and Iran right now, and they are coming to some agreements. Of course, they have certain differences. The old rivalries still exist, but gradually they're coming to understanding that it's their interest to work together in the region, and it is happening. It is happening. So I'm looking at it as a positive process that is going on right now between Iran and Saudi Arabia.
Okay, next is Kit, followed by Raj, and then Janet. If you could keep your questions to 2 minutes, we're running short of time now. So please, Kit, go ahead and unmute and ask your question.
To understand, Rich.
Yeah, you're
Okay, hi.
feedbacking. You're going to have
Richard
to
has
get
his
the
cell
other.
phone on.
Yeah.
Okay, hi, and thank you very much for speaking and bringing us up to date with what's going on in Iran. We used to be active on the college campuses, many years ago, many decades ago, when the Iranian Revolution was happening there back then. What is the view of Iranian Americans in the US to what is happening in Iran right now? And do they recognize the US imperialist role in what is going on with the protests? Are they swept up in the US and British media's propaganda? And also, I thought you had mentioned that the merchant class opposes women's rights. And can you describe them a little bit more? Who is this merchant class and what forces are they made up of? Thank you very much.
Thank you, Kit. First of all, the Iranian community in the United States is mostly concentrated in California. There are over 1 million Iranians there in the United States, and majority, about 800,000-900,000 in California, especially Southern California. And if you look at the composition of those people, they are those refugees from the revolution, mostly, who packed up and left with the revolution and transferred all their bank accounts to the US accounts and came. So they are all behind US. That's a hotbed of Iranian royalists right now. So they are full force behind the US, what US is doing to bring down the Iranian government. There are, of course, left forces in Iran that came prior to the revolution. They escaped the Shah's repression of the left. And they have been part of the Iranian Students Association that organized those demonstrations against the Shah at the White House, everywhere. And those people are mostly away from the country. They have been away from the country for a long time. And the two factors has influenced the Iranian left abroad, in my view. First of all, I'm saying abroad because not much of it is left inside. First, the attack on the left by the Islamic Republic government in the 1981, 82, 83, and the mass killings in the prisons of the left forces has impacted their attitude towards the Iranian government in many ways. So they are mostly alienated or opposed to what's going on in Iran. Secondly, the collapse of the Soviet Union socialist camp, the same way it caused split in the communist movement, and a lot of parties left the movement, gave up being Leninists, gave up being Marxist. Italian party dissolved, becoming a party of the left, or you know, lots of transformations. Majority of the Iranian left forces became social democrats of the European type after that. Very few forces left that still consider themselves Marxist-Leninist. Now, among them, this Russian special operations has also caused another level of opposition, and many of them have opposed Russian intervention in the Ukraine, and more or less are talking about condemning Russia alone, and in a way indirectly, implicitly advancing NATO's policy, in a way justifying it. So it's a very bleak situation for the Iranian left right now, as far as I can see it. Very few forces are still holding on to those ideological principles that drove the people. I don't want to particularly mention any particular organization, but it seems even those that are advocating Leninism are now still. You can see the banners next to the royalist banners in Berlin against the Iranian government. So it's very unfortunate, but this is the situation right now.
Okay, next is Raj, followed by Janet. Richard, then I think we're going to close it off, and then we'll turn it back to Roger for the. Roger, muted.
Okay. All right. Thank you, Bahman. I'll turn to this international aspect of, as you said, Iran is in a very crucial location internationally. The north-south oil flow is through Iran to India also, by the way. That's very important to India. And then there is the east-west to China. And so one comment I have is about, since you are in a crucial position of Peace Council presidency, the question about anti-imperialism. I think the mistake in the left is to keep on just making versus imperialism versus non-imperialism. I think to unify the what is going on against U.S. Hegemony in the world, you have to call it unipolar versus multipolar contradiction. And those who are in support of multipolar, which I think most people will be because they see this unipolarity as anti-democratic and anti-humanity. So it'll be easier to organize them rather than imperialism. The problem with imperialism is because how do you, lot of people in the left consider both China and Russia to be, since they're capitalist economies, also to be imperialists themselves. Now, whether that's right or wrong is a different matter, but to unify this movement, you'll have to go to different formulation seems. So having said that, my question is the oil deals that China has made and India, increasing oil from Russia, and this is very crucial because Russian economy has to be supported in order to fight in Ukraine, which I think I'm very clear. In Ukraine, Russia must not lose the war. It's the United States that has, it's a proxy war, and the United States should lose the war because it has no business. So my question to you is how Saudi Arabia just made a deal, Iran has a deal with, and China is the emerging hegemon. I don't think it'll be multipolarity too long, it'll be bipolarity. But the question is this oil trades, etc., feasible with all the control the US has over financial, on insurance and vessels that carry the oil? Is that China can really counter that? Is China in a position to be able to withstand that? That's my question to you. Thank you.
Thank you. First of all, regarding anti-imperialism, by that I didn't mean that we go out and chant anti-imperialism. That's not the issue. Anti-imperialism must be the core analysis for us, as far as I can tell. So we use that as a guide for formulating our strategy. I totally agree with you. If you want to bring all the forces together, you cannot just chant imperialism and anti-imperialism. You have to come up with a formulation that is agreeable to them also, but we should not lose that compass in the process. That's our orientation. So for that matter, let me give you one example. When US intervened in Syria, US Peace Council decided to create a front opposed to US intervention in Syria. You know what our liberal peace forces said? Both sides are bad. Assad is bad, US is bad, we don't want to take side, right? What did we do? We took a delegation of the peace forces to Syria to visit Syria, civil society, parliament, everybody, opposition and all that, come back and report. They came back and reported at the United Nations press conference. They accused us of drinking Assad's Kool-Aid, becoming Putinized and all that, okay? So what did we do? We said, okay, we need to broaden this thing. It's not just about Syria. We have to stop US in doing this. So what's the next step we want to do to bring other forces in? What did we do? Said, okay, we want to be anti-imperialist, but we want broader forces than that, okay? So what did we do? We came with the strategy of forming a coalition in the US against US foreign military bases. With that formula, people who were opposed to military budget, people who were opposed to US presence there and other countries, people who were opposed to all kinds of things, right? War is a bad thing. People of Okinawa being raped, some people are affected by it, all of them joined against US military bases. But that was the core element of US imperialist domination of the world, right? So we managed this anti-imperialist orientation applied to a given situation and managed to mobilize. This is our meaning of anti-imperialist orientation of the movement. It doesn't mean just closing off to those who advocate anti-imperialism. No, that's not the case. And your suggestion, multipolar versus unipolar, is an excellent idea to explore in this context. Let's see who is becoming imperialist and who is not becoming imperialist in this process. We adjust our fights accordingly, right? But at this time, in our view, regardless of what the nature of those two other systems are, Russia and China, one thing is clear, as you said correctly, the victory of NATO in Ukraine is a doomsday for all of us. So we have to stop that. Whether Russia is imperialist or not, that's besides the point, right? Let's move on that channel and move forward with that. And if we can do it, okay. But we cannot predict, okay, we're not gonna intervene in this current situation because in the future they may take over, right? We have to deal with the present circumstances. And present circumstances, a multipolar world will not be a socialist world automatically. We know that. But it creates some breathing space for some of the smaller countries to follow their own path here in this competition of powers. If we see that as a positive step, we have to fight for it. And that is based on an anti-imperialist understanding. That's how we approach it.
Thank you very much. I totally agree with you.
Okay, Janet and Richard, and then we're going to wrap it up. If you could keep it to 2 minutes at max, please. Go ahead, Janet.
Sure, yeah. And I agree with Raj and Bahman, about what you just were saying about the, well, anyway. I wanted to know more about the U.S. Peace Council, which I'm embarrassed to say I don't know much about. The word peace in that, so wanting a Russian victory in Ukraine, it's a military victory. So is that, there's kind of a contradiction there, but in any case, would you tell us who is on the executive committee? I'm very impressed with the bylaws, by the way. Who's on the executive committee? Who are the officers? And can you share some of the names of the organizations and individual members?
Definitely.
And sorry?
Go ahead, sure. Sorry.
Yeah, just finally, do you really think that as an NGO member of the United Nations that the U.S. Peace Council can have an influence there, given the UN is really a tool of the collective West?
Great. We are not there to influence UN. That gives us the opportunity to meet with the missions of progressive states.
Okay.
To coordinate work with them. That is what we do. Meeting with Palestinian ambassador, meeting with Syrian ambassador, meeting with, this is what we do. We're not trying to influence UN. But regarding US Peace Council, Executive Committee, we have about 16, 17 people on the committee, I think. Not all of them are present in all of the meetings, of course. But Roger, definitely, Margaret Flowers, Vijay Prashad, Ajamu Baraka, Henry Lohendorf. Roger, help me too.
Well, is there a website where you,
yes, uspeacecouncil.org.
I didn't see the names of the executive committee there.
No, we don't have it published there.
Okay.
Yeah. Joe Jameson, Gerald Horn. I said Ajamu Baraka, I mentioned that, right?
Yes.
My memory is
not. How about some organizations?
Pardon?
Organizations that are members of the
No,
council?
U.S. Peace Council is not a coalition of organizations.
Okay.
It's one single organization. Those people who are on the executive committee of the U.S. Peace Council are not representing their organization. They are representing themselves as a member of U.S. Peace Council.
Perhaps you could explain the relationship of the U.S. Peace Council to the World Peace Council and the role of the World Peace Council.
Okay, sure. U.S. Peace Council is a member organization of the World Peace Council, which was formed after World War II. People like Picasso, Charlie Chaplin, and all those people were part of it at the beginning. World U.S. Peace Council is one of the, World Peace Council used to have 120 countries as its member. It has one representative in every country. That is one national organization is a member of World Peace Council. So U.S. Peace Council is the member organization of World Peace Council from the United States. It has an executive committee of 40 countries and a secretariat of 13 countries, consisting of 13 countries. U.S. Peace Council is a member of Secretariat of the World Peace Council. We just had our assembly every 4 years. We had it in Vietnam after 6 years because of the COVID delayed. Very successful meeting, also an anti-imperialist conference at the end of it. We elected a new president for the World Peace Council, Comrade Palab Sen Gupta from India. We had our president as from Brazil up until last assembly, Comrade Socorro Gomez from Brazil. We have 5 regions in the World Peace Council based on the continental divisions. Each region has its own coordinator. Cuba is the coordinator of the whole region, Americas. Middle East is Palestine. Asia is Nepal. Europe is Portugal. What else did I miss?
Africa.
Africa is South Africa. So these are all regional coordinators. All of them are in the Secretariat of the World Peace Council. So that's how it works.
Thank you.
Sure.
Okay, our last question is, Richard, if you keep it to 2 minutes or under, and then I'll turn it over to Roger to wrap up.
Yeah, I just sort of wanted to remind people that in large measure, foreign policy follows the buck, if you will, or in this case, I think it's actually the wand. And because after all, it is the Chinese that really seem to have the financial power here, whereas the US has a lot of debt. And ultimately, politics will, if you buy Marx, that you'll see the Chinese are have the upper hand here. Anyways, I agree with Sharon that we need to get beyond nationalism, that we need to get an international perspective, but so much of that is how do we get the message out? I guess that's the question. How do we get beyond mainstream media? Somebody brought up, I think was it Jay, I think brought that question up. And how do we as activists get beyond the Chris Hayes and the Rachel Maddows of the world? Thank you.
That's a $64,000 question that all of us are struggling with, really. I don't know the answer. We are trying to figure out. But, the control of the media is really absolute in terms of the control of the establishment over the media. And the media is the establishment anyway. If people think that the government controls them, no. They're corporations like every other ones. They have the same interests and they're following their own interests, and that's the way it is. So, one time when I was working closely with WBAI people in New York, I was suggesting that maybe we should have parts of the movement having their own program on like labor having its own, peace movement having its own, all of those, instead of individual producer producing things for themselves, what they think is useful. They didn't work out, but Samurai marksman agreed with me.
If I can interrupt you just for a second, Bahman. You raise a really interesting point, and that is that the U.S. labor has a lot of assets at its disposal. They have far more assets than they, and they also the farmer laborers, I think, have their own damn satellite. How do we, it seems to me that we could get into the labor movement and, get them to spend some money on, on getting the message out. I'll shut up again.
I wish.
Well, I think that all of that is very relevant. I think we just cannot give up. So it's a different time now than than the beginning of the anti-Vietnam War movement. However, there's lessons to look back on and learn from that. You know, the beginning of the anti-war movement, there were 3 people, you know, standing on the library steps of the college I was in, saying the U.S. is involved in Vietnam. It was wrong, you know, U.S. out of Vietnam. And my question was, where is Vietnam? You know, which I was not the only person on that campus who was asking that question. We cannot give up. We have to, it's people in the streets, and it's fighting against the corporate media monopoly over the airwaves, an old term, over the internet and over everything else. You know, I think what you said about WBAI applies to the other stations as well in Pacifica. The station here, you know, threw off the air one of the most progressive labor programs, David Bacon's program. They threw them off the air. We have to fight at that level as well.
Right, exactly.
Yeah, I'd like to know,
so
I'd like to
Roger,
know more about, I'd like to know more about the WBAI, but would you put your email address in the chat? Bahman, would you mind?
Mine you're talking about?
Yes, yes.
Sure.
Okay,
Okay,
so I'm
well,
gonna turn
thank
this
you.
over to Roger. We're gonna have to stop the regular, so wrap it up, Roger, and then we'll
Yeah.
stop the recording. We continue.
This is really a pleasure, Bahman. This is the second time that Bahman has spoken to the Marxist Library. And I hope, Bahman, that you'll consider coming back here again. You just really stimulated a lot of good questions, but there's so much more that you could tell us about the situation that is evolving. So I hope you'll consider coming back. I want to thank you for coming. Thank all the participants for participating, and we'll see you next week. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Roger. It will be an honor for me. Anytime, I'll be happy to. It's a great group of people to be part of. Thank you.
Institute for the Critical Study of Society at the Nebo Proctor Marxist Library receives no corporate funding, nor do we have any paid staff. We rely on the support of working class folks that share our commitment to the socialist legacy of Karl Marx. We continue to need funds to meet necessary expenses. Since we can no longer pass the hat at our in-person forums, please send contributions to our treasurer, either online via PayPal or by check. The PayPal ID is ICSS Sunday, SUNDAY, @yahoo.com, and the name is Richard Fallenbaum. And checks may be made out to Richard Fallenbaum and sent to him at 1225 Nielsen Street, Berkeley, California, 94706. Fallenbaum is spelled Fallenbaum. To donate directly to the Marxist Library, send a check to the Nebo Proctor Marxist Library at 6501 Telegraph Avenue, Oakland, California, 94609, or directly or donate online at www.paypal.me/npml. For information, write to npml at marxistlibr.org, and the website is marxistlibr.org.